Drop the sword, or I will finish what your cowardice started 13 years ago.
I do not know what you mean, Your Highness.
Your scent, why does it change at night? Elowen, that is your name, is it not?
Please, if the court learns the truth, my family will die.
How long?
13 years.
Remove your armor. Let this court see the truth. Stop! Captain Ashford will not be disrobed before this court like a criminal.
The blade pressed against her throat before she even saw him move. "Drop the sword," Prince Hadrian said, his voice low, almost bored, as if killing men before breakfast was simply part of his morning ritual. "Or I will finish what your cowardice started 13 years ago." Elowen, known to every soldier in the Royal Guard as Captain Elliot Ashford, did not drop her sword. Her pulse hammered beneath the cold steel at her neck, but her hand remained steady on the hilt. 13 years of discipline had taught her that fear shown was fear exploited. "I don't know what you mean, Your Highness," she said, keeping her voice pitched low, rough, the way she had trained it to sound for over a decade. Hadrian's eyes, gray as storm clouds over the northern cliffs, studied her face with an intensity that made her stomach twist. He had always looked at her strangely, too long, too searching. She had told herself for months now that it meant nothing. That a prince sworn to celibacy, cursed by blood and prophecy never to love, could not possibly see her, the woman she had buried beneath bindings and short-cropped hair in a man's name. But tonight, his blade trembled, just slightly, just enough that she noticed. "Your scent," he murmured, almost to himself, eyes narrowing. "Why does it change at night?" Her heart stopped. He knows. He's always known. He just hasn't let himself believe it. "I've been riding hard, Your Highness," she said quickly. Sweat does strange things to a man. For one suspended moment, neither of them moved. The torches along the palace wall hissed in the wind. Somewhere beyond the courtyard, an owl called into the dark, and Elowen thought, absurdly, that she might die here, caught at last, after 13 years of hiding, by the one man whose attention she had both craved and feared above all others. Then Hadrian lowered the blade. "Get out of my sight, Captain," he said, voice rough, "before I do something we will both regret." She did not need to be told twice. 13 years earlier, Elowen had been a girl of 15, standing in the candlelit study of her dying father, listening to him explain, in a voice already thinned by illness, that the Ashford line would end with her, unless she became something she was not. "There is no son," her father had whispered, gripping her hand so tightly it bruised. "There never was, only you. And by the old law, a house without a male heir loses its land, its name, its place at court. Everything I built, everything you will inherit, gone, swallowed by the crown within the year." "Then let it be gone," young Elowen had said, tears streaking her face. "I don't care about the land, I care about you." Her father had smiled then, weak and sad. "You will care, child. When you are starving in the gutter with your mother and sisters, you will care very much." He pressed a small dagger into her palm, the one that would later never leave her side. "Become Elliot, train, fight, survive, and one day, when you are strong enough that no one can take it from you again, you may choose to be Elowen once more." She had not known, that night, that one day would stretch across 13 winters, that she would learn to walk like a man, speak like a man, bleed and bruise and nearly die like a man, all while hiding beneath linen wraps a body that ached to be seen, to be known, to be loved, and never could be. She had not known, either, that fate would place her, eventually in the personal guard of Prince Hadrian of Veymar, the celibate prince, as the kingdom called him in hushed, reverent tones. The man who had sworn before the entire royal court never to take a wife, never to touch a woman with affection, never to risk the curse that had haunted his bloodline for 4 generations. That any heir born of true love to a Veymar prince would bring ruin upon the kingdom. No one questioned why he chose Captain Elliot Ashford as his most trusted guard. No one suspected that the silent, scarred soldier who slept outside his chamber door each night was, in fact, a woman who had fallen, slowly, helplessly, against every instinct of survival, in love with the very man she was sworn to protect. The morning after the blade incident, Elowen found Hadrian in the training yard, alone, driving his sword through a wooden post with a violence that had nothing to do with practice. "You're going to break it," she said, before she could stop herself. He didn't turn. "Good, it deserves it." She studied him from the shadow of the archway, the tension in his shoulders, the sweat darkening his collar despite the cold morning air, the way his jaw clenched like a man fighting something far more dangerous than wood and iron. "Your Highness, don't," he said, finally turning to face her. His eyes were red-rimmed, as if he hadn't slept. "Don't call me that this morning, Elliot. I am not in the mood for titles." "Then what are you in the mood for?" It was a foolish question. She knew it the moment it left her mouth. But something in his expression, raw, unguarded, hungry in a way she had never seen from him, made her chest ache with a longing so fierce it frightened her. "I don't know," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what's happening to me, Elliot. I look at you and I feel things I swore I would never feel for anyone. I dream of things I have no right to dream of. And last night, when I held that blade to your throat, do you know what I thought?" Her breath caught. "What?" I thought. "If I kill him, this feeling dies with him." He laughed, bitter and broken. "And then I thought, I would rather die myself than lose him." He shook his head, pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes. "What kind of madness is that, to feel such things for another man?" Elowen's heart shattered and soared in the same breath. "He doesn't know. He feels it. He feels everything, and he doesn't even know why." She wanted, more than she had wanted anything in 13 years, to tell him the truth. To unwrap the bindings, let down her hair, stand before him as Elowen Ashford, and watch the confusion in his eyes turn to understanding, to relief, to something that might, finally, be allowed to bloom into love. But the law was the law. If the court discovered a woman who had served as a royal guard, had stood, armed, within arm's reach of the prince himself, deceiving the crown for over a decade, the punishment was death. Not just for her mother, her sisters, everyone who had ever sheltered the secret. So instead, she said the only thing she could. "Perhaps it is not madness, Your Highness. Perhaps it is simply loyalty, grown into something larger than either of us expected." He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind his stormy eyes. "Perhaps," he said softly, "or perhaps I am cursed twice now." The weeks that followed were a slow unraveling, a tightening spiral of glances held too long, hands that brushed and lingered, conversations that drifted, again and again, toward dangerous honesty. It was Hadrian who broke first. It happened on a night thick with rain, when a fever swept through Elowen's body after a border skirmish left her wounded, a gash along her ribs that she had hidden, bound tight beneath her armor, refusing to let the physician examine her for fear of what he would discover. She collapsed in the hallway outside Hadrian's chamber. When she woke, she was lying in his bed, and the bindings around her chest had been cut away. Hadrian sat in the chair beside her, his face pale as bone, staring at her as if he had seen a ghost, or perhaps, she thought with rising terror, as if he had seen the truth for the first time. "Elowen," he said, and her name in his mouth sounded like a prayer and a curse all at once. "That is your name, isn't it? Not Elliot. Elowen." She could not speak, could not move. 13 years of careful, desperate hiding undone in a single fevered night. "How long?" he asked, voice shaking. "How long have you been lying to me? To the crown? To everyone?" 13 years, she whispered finally, tears slipping hot down her temples into her hair. "Please, Your Highness. My family, if the court learns, the court will learn nothing from me." He rose abruptly, pacing to the window, his back rigid. "But I need to understand. Every moment, every feeling I thought was some unnatural madness. It was never madness at all, was it? It was this." He turned back to her, and the look on his face stole the breath from her lungs. "It was always you. Hadrian, do not say my name like that," he said, crossing back to the bed in 3 long strides, kneeling beside her, his hand hovering just above her bare collarbone as if he didn't trust himself to touch her. "Not unless you mean to stay. Not unless you mean to let me love you the way I have wanted to for months, without understanding why." "You swore an oath," she reminded him, even as her body leaned helplessly toward his hand. The curse," he said bitterly, "has already taken 13 years of your life and turned you into a stranger to yourself. I will not let it take this too." His fingers finally brushed her skin, gentle as a vow. "I don't care what ruins the prophecy promises. I have spent my whole life being celibate, being cold, being safe, and I have never once felt alive until you." She should have stopped him. She should have reminded him of the danger, the executioner's blade waiting for them both, if this was ever discovered. Instead, she reached up and laced her fingers through his. "Then love me," she whispered, "and let the prophecy do what it will. But love, in a kingdom built on secrets and succession, was never simple. 3 weeks after that fevered night, a woman arrived at court, Duchess Faustine of Brenmore, cousin to the king, with sharp eyes and a sharper ambition. She had spent years cultivating a claim to Hadrian's hand, certain that his vow of celibacy was merely a formality that political marriage could circumvent. She noticed, almost immediately, the way the prince's gaze followed his captain of the guard across every room. "How curious," she said one evening, cornering Elowen, now once again bound and disguised as Elliot for court appearances, in a quiet alcove. "The prince looks at you the way men look at women they intend to marry. And yet you are merely a soldier." Her smile was knife-thin. "Or are you?" Elowen's blood ran cold. I don't know what you mean, Duchess. Don't you?" Faustine leaned closer, voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "I have spies everywhere, Captain Ashford. I know things about your family, your father's deathbed confession, the missing daughter who vanished the same week his son appeared at the academy gates." She straightened, smoothing her skirts. "I would be very careful, if I were you, about how close you let yourself grow to His Highness. Secrets have a way of finding daylight, and when this one does, it won't just be your head on the block." She swept away, leaving Elowen frozen in the alcove, heart pounding with a terror sharper than any blade. That night she told Hadrian everything, the Duchess's threat, the danger closing in around them. His jaw tightened with a fury she had never seen in him before. "She will not touch you," he said. "I will see her exiled before I let her, and what reason will you give the king?" Elowen demanded. "That Duchess threatened your guard, Captain?" "Hadrian, the moment anyone investigates, they will find me. They will find everything. My mother, my sisters, then we run," he said suddenly, gripping her shoulders. "Tonight, we disappear into the borderlands, change our names, leave the crown and the curse, and all of it behind. You are the heir to Veymar," she said softly, even as her heart broke at the desperate hope in his eyes. "You cannot simply vanish. Your people need you." "I need you," he said, voice cracking. "For the first time in my life, I have something worth protecting that isn't duty or bloodline or prophecy. I will not lose it to a duchess's ambition." She kissed him then, slow and aching, trying to memorize the shape of his mouth against hers, in case it was the last time they were allowed this closeness. Neither of them knew that, even as they embraced in the shadowed garden, Duchess Faustine was already penning a letter to the king, one that would, within days, shatter everything they had so carefully built. The summons came at dawn. Elowen, still as Elliot, armor donned, sword at her hip, was called before the king himself in the great hall, before half the assembled court. Hadrian stood rigid beside his father's throne, his face a mask of carefully controlled fury, though Elowen could see the panic flickering beneath it. "Captain Ashford," the king said, his voice booming through the hall, "a grave accusation has been brought before me. Duchess Faustine claims you are not who you say you are, that you have deceived this crown for over a decade." His gaze, cold and assessing, swept over her. "Remove your armor. Let the court see the truth." Elowen's hands trembled at the buckles of her breastplate. This was it. The end of 13 years of survival, of sacrifice, of hiding. The moment the law would condemn her, and everyone she loved, to ruin. She looked, once, at Hadrian. His eyes held hers, fierce and steady, and in them she read a single silent promise. "Whatever happens, I am with you." With shaking hands she reached for the final strap of her armor, and the hall fell utterly, breathlessly silent, waiting to see what truth would be revealed. Her fingers found the last buckle. The leather strap loosened, the breastplate shifted, and then, before it could fall away and reveal everything, a voice cut through the hall like a blade. "Stop." It was not the king who spoke, it was Hadrian. He stepped forward, descending the dais, his boots echoing against the marble floor with a sound that silenced even the whispering courtiers. "Captain Ashford will not be disrobed before this court like a criminal," he said, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of a man who had spent his whole life being obeyed. "If there is an accusation to answer, it will be answered with evidence, not humiliation." The king's eyes narrowed. "You forget yourself, Hadrian. This is a matter of crown law." "Then let the Duchess present her proof," Hadrian said, turning to where Faustine stood near the dais, smug satisfaction curdling on her face. Not a rumor, not whispers gathered from frightened servants. Proof. Faustine's smile faltered, just slightly. "Your Majesty, I have witnesses who will testify." "Witnesses," Hadrian repeated, his voice cold. "Paid, no doubt, or threatened. Tell me, Duchess, what exactly do you stand to gain should Captain Ashford be disgraced? A clearer path to my hand, perhaps? A ripple of scandalized murmurs moved through the court. The king raised a hand for silence, his gaze shifting between his son and the Duchess with new and dangerous interest. Elowen stood frozen at the center of it all, her armor still hanging loose at her shoulder, her heart slamming against her ribs. She understood with sudden clarity what Hadrian was doing, buying her time, drawing the court's suspicion away from her and onto Faustine's motives. But time was all it was, a reprieve, not a rescue. This matter, the king said finally, will be investigated properly. Captain Ashford, you are relieved of your guard duties until the truth is determined. You will remain within the palace under watch. It was not freedom, but it was not the executioner's block either. Not yet. That night, Elowen did not wait for the guards stationed outside her chamber to fall asleep. She did not wait for permission, or safety, or a better plan. She packed what little she could carry, cut her hair shorter still with shaking hands, and slipped through a servant's passage her father had once shown her in childhood visits to the capital, a passage that led, eventually, to the city's outer wall, and beyond it, to the dark and uncertain freedom of the world, outside Veymar's borders. She left no note. She could not risk one being found. But she pressed one final kiss to the small dagger her father had given her 13 years ago, the one she had carried through every battle, every disguise, every lie, and whispered, into the darkness, an apology to the prince she was leaving behind. I am sorry, Hadrian. I would rather vanish than watch you destroy yourself trying to save me. When the guards discovered her chamber empty at dawn, the palace erupted into chaos. Hadrian heard the news standing in the training yard, sword still in hand, and felt something inside his chest crack open like ice giving way beneath too much weight. Gone? He repeated, voice hollow. What do you mean gone? Vanished in the night, your highness, the guard captain reported, refusing to meet his eyes. No trace, no sign of which direction he took. Hadrian's sword clattered to the stones. For 3 days, he barely spoke. He ate little, slept less, and spent long hours locked in his chamber, staring at the small embroidered handkerchief Elowen had once used to bind a wound on his arm, and never asked to have returned. It was Faustine, of all people, who found him there on the 4th night, her earlier triumph long since curdled into something like nervous regret. You should know, she said quietly, standing in his doorway. I did not mean for her to run. I only meant to frighten her from your side. You did not think a woman who had survived 13 years of impossible deception would choose disappearance over disgrace. Hadrian's voice was flat, exhausted. You did not think at all, Duchess. You only wanted what you could not have, and you were willing to destroy someone else to take it. Faustine had no answer for that. She left without another word, and Hadrian never saw her at court again. Whether from shame or quiet exile, he never bothered to learn. But her warning, unintentional as it was, lit something dangerous and desperate in him. If she ran, he said to himself, alone in the dark, then I will find her. I do not care if it takes years. I do not care what the crown or the curse or anyone else has to say about it. He began making plans that very night. Quiet inquiries, trusted men sent in every direction, coins spent freely to loosen tongues in border towns and trading posts. The kingdom watched, bewildered, as their celibate prince transformed, almost overnight, into something else entirely. A man-hunting with single-minded obsession for a guard captain who had vanished into the wind. Elowen, meanwhile, had not gone far. Not at first. She found shelter in a small village, 3 days' ride from the capital, calling herself by yet another name, taking in mending work to survive while she decided what came next. She told herself, over and over, that this was for the best, that Hadrian would forget her in time, find a political match that satisfied the crown, let the curse and the prophecy settle back into the comfortable shape it had held before she ever disturbed it. She told herself this every morning for 6 weeks. It was in the 7th week that she first felt the sickness, a heaviness in her stomach, a tenderness she did not understand, until the village healer, an old woman with knowing eyes, took one look at her pale face and trembling hands and said gently, "You're carrying, child. How far along, do you think?" Elowen sat very still, the words settling over her like a verdict. 7 weeks, the fever, his chamber, the night the bindings came undone. She pressed a hand to her stomach, and for the first time since fleeing the capital she allowed herself to weep. Not from fear, though fear was there too, sharp and constant, but from a grief so deep it stole the breath from her lungs. A child, Hadrian's child, proof of the very love the prophecy warned would bring ruin upon the kingdom. If the crown ever learned of this, if Faustine or anyone like her ever discovered that the celibate prince had broken his vow and fathered a child with a woman who had deceived the court for 13 years, there would be no mercy. Not for Elowen, not for the baby growing inside her. She left the village within the week, moving further from the capital, further from anywhere a royal search might think to look, taking only the name of a fishing town on the kingdom's farthest coast, and the small dagger that had been her father's, her only constant companion through every disguise she had ever worn. She told herself this was protection. That distance was love in its own desperate way. She did not yet know that somewhere behind her, growing closer with every passing month, a prince who refused to give up the hunt was drawing nearer to the truth, and that when he finally found her, the secret she carried would change everything, for both of them, forever. 2 years passed. In the fishing town of Brackwater, far from the marble halls and gilded intrigue of Veymar's court, a woman known only as Ilara raised her daughter alone, working the harbor markets, telling no one of the life she had left behind. The girl, Wren, she called her, with hair the color of storm clouds and eyes that seemed, even at 2 years old, to hold a strange and knowing intensity, was the only piece of her old life Elowen allowed herself to keep close. She told herself she had made peace with it, the quiet life, the solitude, the ache that never quite faded when she watched Wren's small face and saw, unmistakably, the shape of Hadrian's jaw, the exact gray of his storm cloud eyes. She did not know that a ship had docked in Brackwater's harbor 3 days prior, carrying a man who had spent 2 years and a small fortune chasing rumors across half the kingdom. A man who had finally found a trail that led somewhere real. She did not know, as she walked home from the market that evening with Wren's small hand clasped in hers, that Prince Hadrian of Veymar stood at the edge of the harbor square, frozen in place, staring at a woman with cropped dark hair and a child with his own eyes, feeling the entire world tilt sideways beneath his feet. "Elowen," he breathed, the name catching in his throat like a prayer 2 years overdue. She turned. Their eyes met across the crowded square, and for one suspended, breathless moment, neither of them moved, caught between the life she had built to protect them both and the truth that had finally, inevitably, found its way home. For a moment, Elowen could not breathe. The harbor noise around her, gulls crying, fishermen calling prices, the creak of ropes against wooden hulls, faded into a distant hum. All she could see was him, older than she remembered, a faint scar along his temple that hadn't been there before, his gray eyes fixed on her with an intensity that stripped away 2 years of careful distance in a single glance. Wren tugged at her hand. "Mama, who's that?" The word mama seemed to detonate something in Hadrian's chest. His gaze dropped to the little girl, to the storm cloud eyes so exactly like his own, and Elowen watched the realization crash over him like a wave breaking against rock. "Elowen," he said again, stepping forward. His voice shook. "Is she... Don't," Elowen whispered, pulling Wren protectively closer, though there was nowhere left to run. Not from this. Not from him. "Please, Hadrian. Not here." He stopped his advance, but his eyes never left the child. "How old?" "Almost 2. She watched him do the arithmetic in his head, watched the exact moment understanding broke fully across his face, grief and wonder and fury all tangled together. 2 years, he said hoarsely. 2 years you let me search half the kingdom, let me believe I might never find you, while you were raising my child alone. "I was protecting her," Elowen said, fierce despite the tears blurring her vision. "Protecting both of us. If the court had learned, the court be damned," Hadrian said, closing the distance between them at last, his hand rising to cup her face with a tenderness that undid every wall she had spent 2 years building. "Do you understand what I have done these past 2 years? I dismantled Faustine's influence at court piece by piece. I forced my father to acknowledge the injustice of the male heir law that drove you into hiding in the first place. I have spent every waking hour trying to build a kingdom where you would not have had to run from me at all." Elowen stared at him, stunned. "You changed the law?" "I am changing it," he corrected. "It is not finished. But it will be, Elowen. I swore it the night you vanished, that no woman in Veymar would ever again have to become someone else simply to survive." His thumb brushed away a tear sliding down her cheek. "I do not care about the prophecy. I never did, not really. I care about you and about her." His eyes flicked, wondering, to Ren, and about the life we should have been allowed to have from the very beginning. Ren, unbothered by the weight of the moment, tilted her head and studied Hadrian with open curiosity. "Are you my papa?" The question hung in the salt-heavy air. Hadrian knelt slowly, bringing himself to the child's eye level. His composure, the same iron composure that had made him feared across the kingdom, cracking entirely. "Yes," he said, voice rough with emotion. "Yes, I believe I am." They did not return to the capital immediately. For 3 weeks Hadrian remained in Blackwater, staying in a modest inn near the harbor, insisting on nothing, demanding nothing, simply being present at breakfast, present when Ren fell asleep against his shoulder during evening walks along the shore, present in the quiet, careful rebuilding of trust between himself and the woman he had never stopped loving. "I need you to understand something," Elowen told him one evening, as they sat together on the rocks overlooking the harbor, Ren asleep in a basket nearby. "I did not leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I was terrified of the crown, of the curse, of watching you destroy your own future to protect a woman the law would call a criminal." "I know," Hadrian said quietly. "I have had 2 years to understand it. But Elowen, I need you to understand something as well. The prophecy, the curse, all of it, I looked into it. Truly looked, not simply accepted what my father and his father before him always claimed." He took her hand. "There was never a curse on love, Elowen. There was only ever a curse crafted by an ambitious court advisor 3 generations ago, designed to keep the crown prince unmarried and pliable, easily controlled through fear of a prophecy that was never real to begin with." Elowen went very still. "It was never real? A lie," Hadrian confirmed, bitterness edging his voice. "Passed down through generations of frightened princes too afraid to question it. I found the original scrolls in the royal archive. There is no curse, Elowen. There never was." His grip on her hand tightened. 13 years of your life, spent hiding as someone you were never meant to be. 2 years, spent running from a threat that was built on nothing but manipulation and fear. I will not let either of us lose another single day to lies. Tears spilled freely down her face now, grief and relief tangled together beyond separating. "Then what happens now?" Hadrian rose, drawing her up with him, and for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, he smiled, truly smiled, unguarded and bright. "Now," he said, "you come home, not as Elliot, not hiding, not disguised, not afraid, as Elowen, as my wife, if you will have me, and as the mother of the child who will one day, if she chooses, inherit a kingdom that will never again force a daughter to become someone she is not simply to survive." The wedding took place at midsummer, beneath the great stone archways of Veymar's cathedral, before a court that had, in the 2 years since Hadrian's search began, come to both fear and admire their prince's relentless, unshakable devotion. Duchess Faustine did not attend. She had long since retreated to a quiet estate on the kingdom's edge, her ambitions and influence thoroughly, permanently dismantled. The old male heir law that had driven a grieving 15-year-old girl into 13 years of hiding was formally abolished that same season, inscribed into Veymar's founding charter as one of Prince Hadrian's first acts as heir apparent. Elowen stood at the altar in a gown of deep green, the color, Hadrian told her, of the forests where she had once trained as a girl pretending to be a boy, a color he had chosen deliberately, so that some piece of Elliot Ashford's courage would always walk beside Elowen into whatever came next. Ren, now 3, scattered flower petals down the aisle with the solemn seriousness only a small child could bring to such an important task, entirely unaware that the eyes of an entire kingdom watched her with quiet, tearful affection. When Hadrian took Elowen's hands before the altar, his voice carried clear and unwavering through the hushed cathedral. "For 13 years you hid to survive," he said. "For 2 years you hid to protect yourself. I vow, from this day forward, that you will never again need to hide from anything. Not the crown, not the court, not even yourself. I love you, Elowen Ashford, not the disguise, not the legend the kingdom whispers about a captain who vanished and a prince who never gave up the search. You, only ever you." Elowen, through tears she no longer bothered to hide, answered with a vow of her own, one that spoke not of duty or survival, but simply, finally, of love freely chosen rather than desperately hidden. They were married as the summer sun broke gold across the cathedral windows, and when Hadrian finally kissed his bride before the assembled court, the applause that rose through the ancient stone halls carried with it something the kingdom of Veymar had not felt in generations. Hope, unburdened at last by fear, prophecy, or lies. Years later, when Wren was old enough to understand, her mother told her the whole story. The dying father's desperate request, the 13 years spent as Elliot Ashford, the fevered night bindings finally came undone, the desperate flight, and the prince who refused, against impossible odds, to stop searching until he found what he had lost. "Why did you tell no one the truth, Mama?" Wren asked, wide-eyed, curled against her mother's side. "Because the world told me I had to become someone else to be safe," Elowen answered gently. "But your father taught me something even more important than survival, little one. He taught me that love, real love, does not ask you to hide. It asks you to be found." Outside the palace windows, the kingdom of Veymar carried on beneath a summer sky, its laws rewritten, its old fears dismantled, its future secured not by prophecy or bloodline, but by a love that had endured 13 years of silence and 2 years of searching to finally fully come home. Thank you for staying with Elowen and Hadrian through every twist of this journey. If their story moved you, if it reminded you that the truest strength often lives quietly, waiting for the right moment to be seen, please leave a comment sharing which part touched you most. Give this video a like, and subscribe here at the Royal Duke Diaries for more stories of hidden hearts, royal secrets, and love that refuses to stay buried. Remember, you were never meant to hide who you are to be loved. The right person will always come looking for the truth. Until next time.